Kia ora, I'm Tim McCready and this is Too Much Talk, a podcast from Onehunga FM. Way back in 1893, Elizabeth Yates became Mayor of Onehunga and the first female mayor in the British Empire. She famously said,
"There is in both borough councils and in Parliament too a great deal too much talk."
In Season 2 of Too Much Talk, we'll be speaking to those candidates vying to be the MP for Maungakiekie, as well as some local friends and commentators. This election is set to be one of the closest ever, and who you choose to represent us locally can have a big impact on what happens to our part of Aotearoa New Zealand. So listen in and make your vote count. In this episode, I'm joined by Greg Fleming, who is running for the upcoming election as the National Party's candidate for Maungakiekie. Greg has 25 years' experience in the charitable sector as an executive, a director, and a consultant. He currently serves on the board of several charitable organisations, and as you'll hear in this episode, he has a surprising opinion on Turkish delights. Well, kia ora, Greg. Welcome along to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Kia ora, Tim. Great to be here.
Awesome. As is often the first question in these kinds of things, I just thought it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. This is, I believe, your first time running to be the local MP for Maungakiekie. So could you tell us a little bit about who you are and your background?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up on a small farm in the Wairarapa, just on the outskirts of Masterton, and trained as a chartered accountant at Victoria University. Before working both a charitable sector and in accounting for about 3 years. During that time, married Kirsten, and then we headed to London. And when I came back from London after a couple of years, that was my intention, was to stay in the business world. So I've been working in finance and marketing abroad. And but then I responded to a request from a couple called Ian and Mary Grant, who had just started an organisation that's now known as Parenting Place. And they wanted someone to come and help them for a bit on the business side. And so I said I'd give them 1 year, and 25 years later, I have not left the community sector. So basically what happened during that 12 months was I got to experience what it's like to spend your days helping people connecting people up with resources and different options that can actually lead them to thrive and flourish in every way, which is what the community sector is all about. And I think once I'd tasted that, I was ruined for life. And so I've gone on to start with friends about sort of 10 or 12 different charities across a range of sectors. And about a year and a half ago, I decided that if I was ever going to look to serve the community and government, I should probably get on with it. I've hit my 50s now, and also the kids are of an age where it probably makes sense to put my hand up. And because I've lived in Maungakiekie for 25 years, so we moved to this community when we moved up to Auckland to take that original job at Parenting Place, and have been here ever since. This has been the community that our kids have all gone through and the like, and so it just so happened that the opportunity came up to be the candidate for the National Party in this area. So the stars aligned, and here I am. So I've been a candidate for 4.5 months now, and 5 weeks to go. And I can't wait for election day.
Yeah, I bet, for many reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will ask you a little bit more about your involvement in the National Party in a little bit, but just to continue the conversation about your career, I thought it was quite interesting looking at your background that you've had quite a varied career. You've imported flower bulbs from South Africa. You've leased computers, golf ball distribution. I think I'm guessing these are kind of in your early days. But I was interested, obviously, in the charity space. I saw you're also founding chair and trustee of Te Whakaora Tangata. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that, because that organisation is set up to address intergenerational poverty. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So how that came about. So after 3.5 years at Parenting Place, I've had 2 stints there. So the first one was when I moved up to Auckland, say 25 years ago, and took on the role as general manager then. I went back about 14 years later as the CEO, and that was the last executive role that I had before moving into the sector of the season of life that I'm now in. So after about 3.5 years at Parenting Place, I got really interested in the role that ideas played. So I was a business student. I had a casual interest in history, but I'd never really formally studied politics, philosophy, and as I started to read on those things, I discovered that that the things that we believe about about society and about human beings ultimately affect not only how we live our lives individually and the things that we prioritize, but obviously collectively, that's what shapes government. So that was really where my interest in public policy began. And so that ultimately led me to get together with a group of friends and start a think tank called Maxim Institute. And it was about 5 years into that journey, I was looking to hire an accountant one time, and one of the applicants was one of the more fascinating people I've met, a lady called Indrane Reddy, and as we often joke, I didn't hire Indrane because she was the strongest accounting candidate, although she was definitely a strong candidate, but because of what she brought with her. And it was this little organisation that, well, it wasn't even an organisation actually, it was just a work that she and her husband were doing, helping people in their community in Clendon, in Manurewa. And it aligned so well with a lot of the work that we'd been doing in Maxim Institute at that time around the drivers of poverty and the drivers of challenges for family and intergenerational challenges. And so I thought, well, hey, here's an awesome opportunity for us as a think tank to maybe get behind a grassroots work, and that's what happened. So we were able to, over the next 18 to 24 months, work with Cliffy and Indrane to leverage both the donor and the wider network that we'd established at Maxim Institute at that time to help take their little organic home-based work and grow it into a fully fledged trust, which is now it's a multi-million-dollar, multi-site organisation. In fact, they just had their big annual dinner last Friday night and packed out the main hall there at Eden Park. So it's been amazing to watch that work grow. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And I do want to ask about the Maxim Institute because there has been a bit of controversy raised in the media about this. And I think this goes back, probably worth pointing out that it was about 20 years ago when you compared same-sex civil unions to incest and polygamy. And I think it took Nationals leader Christopher Luxon by surprise when he was asked about it in the media. Yeah. I think since that came out, you've since said that you wouldn't make those comments again. But I do want to ask for your position on that now.
Yeah. So what I was saying at the time when I issued that press release was that the debate that New Zealand was beginning to have at that stage, which was around what did we think around people's abilities to be able to well, at that stage the discussion wasn't around redefining marriage. It was the civil unions was essentially the precursor to that. The point that I was trying to make was that there was no logical reason for us to exclude people who were in either close relationships or in multi-person relationships. And so I was in that particular press release, I was just looking to be provocative to say, hey, are we actually having the full debate here that we say we're having, or should we actually broaden it? And as I said, when that press release came out, was picked up in April. Certainly in today's context, it was what I was trying to do there didn't end up resonating. It was misunderstood, and to that extent, it wasn't helpful. Yeah. So no, I mean, I'm very happy with where the laws are in New Zealand at this stage, and if anything, I think we're certainly it's a debate that's been had, and I think everyone's comfortable as we were at in New Zealand in terms of the freedom that people have to be able to define and choose their own relationships. And I certainly don't expect that to be a debate or an issue of any kind going forward.
No, and as you say, probably not going to become an issue going forward. But if you were in Parliament at the time of the marriage equality vote, how do you think you would have voted on that one?
I would have actually gone a step further and would have actually argued for government to get out of marriage. So marriage obviously existed for millennia before modern government did. And in hindsight, I think it was probably a mistake for government to ever get involved in marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so the National Party, you've been a candidate, for the first time in this election. But what was it that really attracted you to sort of land with the National Party for this election?
Yeah, so the National Party, first and foremost, is the party of limited government. So it's about individual freedom, responsibility, strong communities, strong businesses, strong families. And that fits very well with my framework, and it's a framework that I really developed during those years at Maxim Institute. So I wouldn't describe myself as a libertarian. I describe myself in terms of political philosophy as a classic liberal. So that is, I do believe that government has a really important role to play. I just believe that it's a much smaller role than what it has grown to be in New Zealand in recent years. So I'm a huge advocate for, not surprising given how I've spent my last 25 years, for the third sector. Some people would call them the institutions of civil society. So that's, families, communities, local schools, obviously, small businesses. So to me, the role of government is best executed when it is empowering those smaller groups to get on and do their things at the front line. And so that is that's the overarching and undergirding framework of the National Party, and it's not the framework of many other political parties in New Zealand. So National is certainly my natural home.
Obviously, you're running in Maungakiekie, so could you just tell us a little bit about what it is that connects you to Maungakiekie and why you're running in this particular seat?
Yeah, so we've lived here for 25 years. So as I mentioned before, when we moved here in early 1998, we bought a house in Athens Road in Onehunga and lived there for about 10 years. And then about 15 years ago, built a house in Green Lane in Whetirangi Road, just opposite Cornwall Park Primary School, where we are still living today. So our 5 kids have been born and raised and gone to schools in this area. And so this is very much home, always has been. And well, it's interesting, it took me a long time to call this place home. I think having grown up in Masterton, that was
quite different. Quite different places.
Yeah, for years I found myself talking about home, even though I hadn't, lived in Masterton for maybe 15 years. The word home to me meant Masterton. But I'd say in the last sort of 7 to 10 years, when I talk about home, I definitely mean this area, particularly around One Tree Hill. That is my ipukaria. It's my place where I feel most alive, and it feeds my heart, my soul, and my imagination. So I'm up there nearly every day, either running or walking, This is, as I say, this really is pretty much the only part of Auckland that I would want to represent. Because for me, if you're going to serve in Parliament, your job first and foremostly is to serve your local community. The opportunity to actually serve the place that has been our community for the whole of our family's life, and as in terms of our family, including our 5 children, and we now have a daughter-in-law as well. This is the one area that I want to represent.
Yeah, great. I'm running. I run around One Tree Hill quite often as well, so I'm surprised I haven't bumped into you. I'll keep an eye out for you.
You probably run past me too quickly. I must give, for the last 4 months I've only run in my blue gear, so it's my uniform now.
Quite easy to spot there. I've noticed you've done quite a lot of local meetings. I've noticed your signs up around the area. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've learnt from them and what kind of feedback you're hearing from the people in Maungakiekie?
Yeah, so the number one issue that just comes up again, it's not surprising, is the cost of living. People just across the spectrum are really, really struggling. I guess I was expecting that when I went out there. What I wasn't expecting was the number 2 issue being as big as it is, which is people's deep concern around crime. And it's been, so one of the first things that I did when I was selected as a candidate in late March, so began campaigning early April, was started to meet business owners. And I remember one of the first meetings that I had was with the head of the Pack and Save there in Royal Oak, and he was explaining to me, and I said to him, what's the biggest issue that's facing you? And he said, straight out, shoplifting. I said, how bad is it? He said, well, 5 years ago, we used to have sort of 1 shoplifting incident a week. We're now having 5 a day. And then as I met all of the other supermarket owner operators, they all had exactly the same story. And then that carried out to jewelers and local dairies, obviously, and just on and on and on. So the level of crime across businesses was that high. Then I bumped into, I remember coming out of, I was just actually heading into the Royal Oak Mall to go and see the owner of Bronson's Jewelers up on the second floor after they had been hit yet again. This is back a couple of months. And as I was walking in, I bumped into one of the mums from Cornwall Park. Her youngest son had been in my cricket team. So I coached for years at Cornwall Park Cricket Club because our boys all went through there. And she just sort of looked a bit shaken. I said, what's up? And she'd just come back from a counselling session because a few weeks earlier, so she lives on Campbell Road on the park side. And she'd come in about 3:00 one afternoon from her backyard to find 3 guys, hooded guys there. They forced her onto the ground. Thankfully, they didn't do her any harm, but they ransacked the house, stole her car, drove across to Pakuranga, repeated the exercise there with a retired elderly folk. And when they were finally caught, all 3 of them were wearing ankle bracelets. And unfortunately, that is not even close to being the only story like that I've encountered these last 4.5 to 5 months. In our little piece of paradise here in Maungakiekie, crime is at levels that I had no idea really that it was that way. So cost of living and crime just dominate. They would make up 95% of the conversations that I'd have with people.
Amazing. And in these podcasts, we're trying to get to know the local candidates, but I think it's also worth touching on a couple of sort of policies that the party is planning to implement. So if you take crime as an example, what could you point to a couple of things that that National would look to do if in government to address that particular issue?
Yeah, so one of the big issues, and I found this one an interesting one for myself, because one of the many things I've been involved in the community sector is around a focus on rehabilitation and the role. I'm a huge believer in the fact that people can change. I think that's part of my core worldview, part of my core anthropology. And so for that reason, I was part of the founding board of a thing called Rethinking Crime and Punishment, started by a guy called Sir Kim Workman, who's now living back in the Wairarapa, where he whakapapas to. And because that has been such a key part of my whole work, including the organisation that we mentioned before, Te Whakaora Tangata, I guess my natural orientation was towards always looking at what are the most restorative practices that we can have. So when I first heard the idea of things like boot camps, my natural posture was like, "Ooh, really? Is that what we want to do? Can we not focus instead on the family context that people are coming from?" Then I started meeting with the local constable here in Onehunga, so Don Allen, been a community, and he, much to my surprise, I guess I was just sort of thinking, well, he's the local cop, absolutely connected in with the community. He's probably going to have a softer stance on these things. He just straight out in our first coffee said, "Man, we need an alternative pathway for these repeat young offenders." And it was about the same time that National had come out with its proposed policy in that area. And he was 100% supportive of it. And he went on to explain to me how just that week he had picked up yet again 3 young Ram Raiders, all in their mid-teens. And when he picked them up, he already knew their names, and because he had encountered them before, actually quite recently, and to the point that he actually knew where they lived. So he drove them home. And he knew that as he sat down at their kitchen table and tried to engage with their parents, that absolutely nothing was going to change. Because the reality of it is that it was the context in which they were living that was actually fostering in them the destructive approach that they were taking to life in the community. And he so wanted to be able to put them into a different environment that would actually give them a different formational exercise and a chance to actually break that just destructive arc that their lives, even at that young age, was set on. Yeah. And so I've actually become a real fan of these things, these military youth academies, and that's a core plank of what National is going to do. Should we become the next government, we are going to provide this alternative pathway for repeat young offenders. And another thing that we're going to do is to ensure that that the people who should be serving their time in prison are serving their time in prison. So if you go back to the story I mentioned before, in terms of my friend living on Campbell Road, every part of that story is tragic. But probably arguably the most tragic part of it is it was completely preventable because all 3 of them were on ankle bracelets. That is, they shouldn't have been out in the community with a chance to reoffend in the first place. Now, obviously, that immediately begs the question, well, at some stage they're going to come out anyway. But then that for me, puts the focus back on, well, what are we actually doing with people when they're actually serving their time? But if they're serving their time, that is our opportunity to work with them. That's simply not happening when they're sitting there at home on home detention. And this is, again, the feedback that I'm getting from Don and from from the many people I've encountered who are in the police force, is that there just isn't the fear of consequences. So for the last 6 years, the only KPI that we've actually had within the criminal justice system has been the reduction of prison numbers. So there was a target set nearly 6 years ago that wanted to reduce prison numbers by 30%. And I've great sympathy for that. At the end of the day, it's a real failure on so many fronts when someone actually ends up in prison. But the problem is that we've achieved that target almost. I think prison numbers are down by 27, 28%, but then crime is up by over 80% on average across multiple measures. So the reality of it is that we actually have to, as sad as it is, we have to ensure that people are serving the time. And so National's announced a range of policies that are going to ensure that happens. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Oh, thanks for the comprehensive answer there. Nice shout out to Don too, who is, of course, also on the local board. So he's been on this podcast before talking about some of those issues that you've mentioned.
Oh, good man.
The interesting thing about Maungakiekie as a seat is it's a bit of a bellwether seat. So it sort of traditionally is swung back and forth between National and Labour. There is this year, there is also a candidate running from the Green Party and also one from ACT. So I wanted to give you the chance. What do you think you would offer that would set you apart from the other candidates that are running?
So obviously, one of the things is the party that I am part of is very likely going to be the party that's actually leading government. So I will actually have pretty good leverage in terms of central government. But another one is the fact that I know this community so well, combined with the work that I have done for the last 25 years. I think I'm really well positioned to be able to actually dig into the issues, not only the national issues that are manifesting themselves in this electorate like they do across nearly all the country, but the issues that are specific to this community as well. And in fact, that's been my modus operandi really in everything that I've done during my career, which is I love identifying where there is a challenge or an opportunity, and then using my network to bring together the resources and the people needed to address that issue or to leverage that opportunity. And so the kind of thing that I've been doing, as I say, at the coalface, the community sector, is something that I would love the opportunity to be able to do as wearing the jacket of a member of parliament, which obviously does come with extra influence and opportunity and the resources to back up those initiatives.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting to talk to you, given you've spent so long in Maungakiekie, and as you say, you've seen a lot of change over that time. Across all parts of the electorate. So I wonder, could you tell us what would be your vision for Maungakiekie into the future that you'd like to see?
I would love to see us be a community where crime is low. We're never going to eradicate crime completely, but where people are actually feeling safe within their homes, and where we can walk into our local dairies and not have to have the kind of conversation that I had with Atit, who is the owner of the Superette on the corner of Athens Road and Mount Smart Road. So that was our local dairy for 10 years when we were living in Athens Road. I met him on the Friday before the ram raid happened. Oh, sorry, he wasn't a ram raid, just a group of young people came in with weapons into his store on Monday afternoon. And when I went to see him the next day, we remembered how when I had the conversation with him the previous Friday, I had said to him, "Have you been attacked yet?" And so part of my vision for Maungakiekie is where you can actually have a conversation with local business owners without having to use the word "yet." So I would love for us to get crime down to the level where both our homes and our businesses are genuinely safe. I'd love for, as a community, for every one of our local schools to be providing world-class education. Not even close. Every student in our electorate receiving that kind of education, and there's a host of reasons for that. Obviously, 50% of how a child performs at school has nothing to do with what happens in the school. It's what they bring from the home. So for that reason, working with, again, community organisations to strengthen what's happening in people's home environment, but also working with local schools so that they are empowered and resourced, and teachers and principals are empowered and resourced to be able to provide that education. And I'd also love a community where our transportation networks rock. So both in terms of our public transport, so there's so much that we can do in terms of rail and buses, but also in terms of our roads to get them unclogged and get the potholes fixed. So honestly, I think Maungakiekie could be and should be, one of the greatest places in the country to live and grow and raise a family. And that's certainly what I've experienced, and it sounds like you have during your lifetime as well. And at the moment, we've got on a number of those fronts we're struggling. But I genuinely think that if we apply ourselves to them, give ourselves 5 or 6 years, we can turn that around.
Yeah, good. Great. Love it. Love the vision. So before we finish up, I do have a quick fire round, which hopefully you can give slightly shorter answers, but I'll give you a little bit of leeway there. But to kick off, I wonder if you could tell us about a political figure from another party in New Zealand that you look up to.
I was a big fan of David Lange of the 1980s. I loved his open-mindedness. I loved the way that even though he came from one particular political framework, he also went on to become the initiator of tomorrow's schools. And I also loved his sense of humour, his wit, and his quickness. Yeah, big fan.
Yeah, nice. All right, if a friend of yours came to you and said, "Recommend me your favourite TV series," which one would you suggest?
Currently it would have to be Foundation, which is streaming on Apple. I've long been
I've heard of it.
I've long been a sci-fi fan. So Isaac Asimov was the Russian science fiction writer in the late 1940s through 1950s. He's really in many ways like the grandfather of modern science fiction. So, for example, he was the inspiration for a lot of George Lucas's ideas. And in his, he wrote, he's a prolific writer, but in his the series that he's most famous for is called Foundation, and it's basically the telling of the rise and fall of a galactic empire. So it sort of mirrors really the rise and fall of, say, the Roman Empire, but he tells it on a galactic-wide scale over 1,000 years, and he sets it 12,000 years in the future. And so it's sat there as this remarkable series in print for 70 years. But it was only when someone like Apple came along with the $600 million budget and decided to actually put it to screen. And they've done, in my opinion, they've done a magnificent job to it. I'm as a fan of the books, I love where they're going. So I'm midway through the second series.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, I'll check that out. Okay, for this next question, I want you to imagine that you're in the supermarket. So let's just say the Royal Oak Pack and Save. Hopefully, this is a couple of years into the future where maybe they're down to sort of sub one shoplifting incident a week. You're standing there in the supermarket. You're in the chocolate confectionery aisle. You feel like something sweet, just as a bit of a treat. What would you be putting in your trolley?
Oh, Turkish Delight.
Turkish Delight, that's a controversial
chocolate-covered Turkish Delight. Yeah, no, I love it. I don't know. I think I've always loved Turkish Delight. I mean, I sometimes wonder where I love the texture of it. I mean, I love the flavor as well. But maybe it's that chewy texture. Maybe it's also a throwback to the fact that my favorite book series of all time is The Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe. And with the role that Turkish Delight plays in there, so maybe something in my subconscious is pointing me that way.
Never in a million years would I have thought someone would pick Turkish Delight, but there you go. Someone must be buying it. All right, what is the most unexpected or interesting skill or hobby that you've got outside of politics?
Unexpected skill. That's a classic question. So in terms of from a sporting point of view, I enjoy golf. I enjoy cricket. I play piano. I only ever play for myself now. But I studied piano for about 10 years as a child. And the last time that I played publicly was in my 7th form production at Wairarapa College. I was the pianist playing honky tonk piano for the Western that we did.
Wow. And that was your final time publicly. You might have to change that.
Yeah, that's right.
And for someone listening, let's say someone that's quite early on in their career and wants to follow in your footsteps and likes the look of your career, what's one piece of advice that you would give them?
That again is a great question. One piece of advice. I'd say take at least a year to go and work in industry or serve in something that is going to expose you to a very different community of people. So for me, probably the most remarkable journey that I've been on during my working career has actually been my engagement with Te Ao Māori, and that came about 7 years ago when I found myself back at Parenting Place. And within a couple of months into that role, I persuaded a good friend of mine, Te Waka McLeod, to move back from Taranaki to come and work alongside me. And what we set about doing was trying to create in that organisation a place that was genuinely hospitable to both Te Reo Māori me ona tikanga. And in doing that, we ended up creating a space where within no time at all, about 20% of our staff were Māori, and that's how I carried on with my journey with the reo takitaki o te whenua nei. And I've often reflected on how much that exposure has shifted my view of and understanding of the context in which we live. And I guess I would say, taking that as an example, and in fact, other examples that I've had like that during the 25 years in the community sector, my challenge would be to people is the best way of challenging your own worldview, which includes your perception of other people and therefore how you can actually make a difference in your community, is to place yourself into uncomfortable contexts.
Yep.
Yeah, so maybe in summary, I'd say place yourself in uncomfortable contexts.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great advice. Second to last question. You've talked a lot about Maungakiekie. I think your favourite place in Maungakiekie is probably Kumu Park, One Tree Hill. But specifically, this is Onehunga FM. If you had to pick one thing that's your favourite thing about Onehunga, what would you pick?
Oh, and I can't pick One Tree Hill?
Oh, I'm going to say no, just because you've already talked about it, just to make it that little bit harder for you.
One thing. Oh, I'm a huge fan of Onehunga Cafe. There on the corner of Street in Onehunga. Yep, huge fan of Curry Leaf, the Indian restaurant further down Onehunga Mall, Bramble further up, Union Post, Mr. Tanaka's. Okay, I'm outing myself here. I love the restaurants and cafes around this place, but it would be really hard to narrow it down to just one of them.
Okay, so maybe one thing could be just food. We'll just say... there
we go. Yeah, the restaurants and cafes in Maungakiekie. Yeah. Perfect,
great. Okay, and final question. Just wanted to give you one last chance to explain why should the people listening to this podcast vote for you in the upcoming election?
Because I will be 100% focused on serving the needs of the people who make up this fantastic election in Maungakiekie. I know this community. I'm getting to know it better every day as I meet people out there. And my knowledge of this community, the heart that I have for it, combined with the skills that I have acquired over the last 25 years, means I'm confident I could serve this community really, really well.
Great, brilliant. Well, Greg, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today. It's been great to hear what drives you and what your vision for the future of Maungakiekie could be if you are indeed the next MP for our area. We really appreciate you taking the time and wish you all the very best for the campaign ahead.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Too Much Talk. We are making these podcasts to help people be as informed as they can be ahead of the election. The success of this podcast relies on people like you helping us reach a wider audience. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please spread the word about us with your friends and neighbours, or give us a review in your favourite podcast app. I'll be speaking with all of Maungakieke's local candidates in the lead up to this year's election, so stay tuned for more conversations. Connect with me on social media if you'd like to get in touch or share your thoughts. I'm Tim_McCready on Twitter, Instagram, Threads. And finally, a massive thanks to my producer Josh Couch, the creative genius behind Onehunga FM and the person who made this podcast a reality. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to make your vote count on October 14.